Welcome back to the Voices of Business, a Santa Cruz Valley Chamber of Commerce podcast. It's good to be with you again. I'm your host, Joshua Maddux. My co-host, Corey Nathan, is stuck on the 405 parking lot. I don't know. It's 105 out, so maybe he's at the beach. Anyway, I am back with you. We'll have Corey fill you in how I guess his trip to the beach is this week. But anyway, back to Santa Clarita podcast news. We talk about business really in Santa Clarita, but all over the country as well. A lot of business owners and leaders in our community, and we really talk about business all over the country. But a lot of business owners and business leaders and other community leaders that we talk with are right here from our hometown, Santa Clarita. And sometimes we don't just talk business. We talk about leadership, management, and life, anything and everything, and sometimes just where the spirit takes us. Please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Tell a friend, give us a good rating and review. All of that really helps pull us up in the algorithms and share with another business owner. I'm super excited to have a conversation today with Paul Butler. Paul is the co-founder and joint owner and client partner at NewLeaf Training and Development, a company that is dedicated to helping businesses unlock their potential through leadership and staff development. Good to have you today.
Oh, thanks, Josh. I'm delighted to be here.
Awesome. So I know, prepping for our conversation today and stuff, I was going through, your background and stuff, and you grew up just around the corner from Santa Clarita, over in England.
That's true.
Yes, so you have ventured far from home, to say.
I am, yes. So I'm originally, if anyone's ever been to England, my wife and I are actually from a place called Lichfield, not to be confused with Lichfield, Connecticut. Lichfield in Staffordshire in England, which is about 30 miles away from Stratford upon Avon, where Shakespeare's from, or Billy Shakes, as we used to call him, the schoolboy. Sounded rather rebellious at the time. And that's where I'm from originally.
Got it. That's crazy. Yeah. Yeah. It's always interesting to hear just some people, it's like, yeah, me born and raised in Santa Clarita, but where have you ventured from and all that type of stuff. Now, you went to the University of Birmingham.
Yes.
And have a degree in business and finance.
Yes.
And so from there, after you graduated, you went into the incredible, exciting career of internal auditing.
Yes.
Hey, finance is sometimes, it's got to get done. So you worked for Jarvis Hotels. And Jarvis, that was, I'm blanking on the name. They go by another name here in the States. It's, was it Radisson? I think it's Radisson.
Jarvis did sell to Radisson, yeah.
Okay, that's where it was. Cool. So was that your first job sort of out of college?
Yes, more or less. I knew that I wanted to work within finance. It was really an industry that came relatively easy to me, and the hotel industry had always appealed to me. And I guess kind of consolidating, probably 10 or 15 years into one statement, I really enjoyed working in the hotel industry. I became a graduate trainee, and I eventually joined Hilton Hotels. And I went up the organizational chain, and I eventually became a regional finance director for about 50 of the hotels in Western Europe. And Hilton asked me to come over to the US after 9/11. And I came over as the finance director for Hilton Honors. You may have heard of Hilton Honors. It's now the world's largest loyalty program, points and miles. Hilton's worldwide headquarters used to be in Beverly Hills, and at that point in time, Hilton was a joint venture between Hilton International out of London, who I worked for, and Hilton US. And long story short, that joint venture dictated that they needed the finance director to be a European, and the finance director was a Swedish guy, and he was on a long-term medical leave. So I came over for 2 years, and they showed us all sorts of areas, and we just fell in love with Santa Clarita, Valencia specifically. And Hilton generously paid for us to have a really nice rental home for a couple of years while we kept the house in England, and we just absolutely loved it here.
So that's sort of answers what my next question was, what brought you here essentially across the pond. And, that was sort of the taste of Santa Clarita, of like, what the city had to offer, and really why you ended up coming back. So 2003, you sort of end that position, here in Beverly Hills. What was next on the docket for you?
Well, we went back over to England. As one can imagine, the hotel industry being decimated after 9/11. So a lot of my
Yeah.
colleagues in Hilton International had either got laid off or they'd left, started up their own business, changed industry completely. But as good fortune would have it, I was approached by Marriott International Hotels, and I joined Marriott in a very similar role to what I was in before, regional finance director, slightly more senior. And so we were in that role for a couple of years. And after a couple of years of being back in England, my wife and I said G. Well, we didn't say G, Josh, because we don't say G in England. I'm just translating now because I'm completely bilingual. But we said, gee, on the basis you've only got one life on this earth, why not be where you want to be, do what you want to be doing with who you want to be doing it with? And so my wife and I decided to start up our own staff training and leadership development company. It took about 2 years to make everything happen with all the appropriate visas, etc. And so we moved back here in February 2006 to start our company, and we've been here ever since.
Yeah, I can't imagine, like, starting a business locally, living in Santa Clarita is challenging enough, let alone having to figure that out from, like, you're in a different country. Like, it's entirely different country laws. It's different. Like, you didn't grow up with that. Like, I grew up with family
Mhm.
members who had businesses. And so, like, I had seen that firsthand, and that's not to say, like, having, an entrepreneurship, in your family, um, if you were there in England and there was somebody you knew that had a business or whatever, but it's just the different aspects of different laws in different countries. Um, and then the fact that you're starting that, you know, there. Um, and so obviously there's, visas involved with that, like you said, and just getting everything started. Um, and that's really sort of the big aspect of what prompted the decision to start your own business, was being able to sort of be where you want to be, where with who you want to be with. Um, So what did that first year or two in business look like? Obviously, it's, a little different now today than it was probably, the first year or two. Especially 2006. Like, there was something just around the corner. I mean, we started business in 2000, what, 8? Um 2007, 2008, somewhere right around there. So, obviously great time to start a business.
Yeah, so some immediate thoughts that come to mind is first of all, I'm actually really grateful for my big business experience as an employee, let's say for 15 years, primarily with Hilton and Marriott and PwC, Price Waterhouse before that, a little bit with Jarvis, as you mentioned, is because I think two things. First of all, that I think one of the things that was able to sustain us in those early years, and obviously does now as well, was the fact that I had such a strong business acumen. So from day one, we always ran our business as if it was a big business with processes, procedures, operation manuals. So that's the first thought that comes to mind. And I think second of all, with the clients that we serve, that I think, to be blunt, a lot of our competitors are all kind of academic theory about leadership development, because they've read a few books, etc. But all of our work is based on things that really do work in the real world of work. And because we primarily serve medium to very large national or global organizations, I think my background, plus obviously our employees' background now, really pays us dividends. But to directly answer your question about that first year, when I look back now, gosh, it was kind of crazy, or as the kids would say, cray cray. Because I'm completely down with the cool kids. It's kind of cray cray because, as you alluded to, I mean, can you imagine starting up a business? You'd never run a business before, coming 5,000 miles away from everything you knew. Without being crude about it, gave up obviously a very well paid job. We had this beautiful old cottage in England where my wife and I were from, our town. And we started on an E2 visa, an entrepreneur's visa, which is right up there with international drug trafficking. It's it's a really hard visa to get. And so when we won that visa, we felt like we'd won Willy Wonka's golden ticket, you know. People often say to me, you know, you always seem so positive, and I say, well, gosh, I'm delighted to be where we are, doing what we're doing. We actually, without digressing too much, we actually started the business initially. I don't know whether you ever remember this lady or met this lady. We started the business initially with this lady called Rachel, and Rachel was also from England, and she worked for Hilton. She was a regional human resources director when I was a
Got
regional
it.
finance director. And so the two of us together, it presented a very powerful case for the immigration authorities with our backgrounds. But after about 6 months, sadly, she just didn't settle here and wanted to go back to England. And that was actually a blessing in disguise because, without boring you with the details, the agreement that we'd wrote was I think we would pay her something like 25% of the net asset value of the company, which at that point in time was the lowest it ever was, mainly because we hadn't got any clients at that stage.
Yeah.
And then the other 75% was payback over a couple of years. So by the time, and then little injection point here was we'd actually planned to go, we started in the February 2006, and we actually planned to go, I think it was 10 months until January 1st the following year before we draw a paycheck on the business. And she actually left in the November of 2006. So that was, as I say, a blessing in disguise. And I think probably the last thing that comes to mind relevant to that question was we were so blessed, really, because some of our first clients were actually really large organizations like Caltech, JPL, a couple of the Claremont colleges, Princess Cruises. And so within the first probably 6 months of business operations, we were already serving some really notable clients.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the whole aspect of, again, just going back to the starting a business piece, like it just, yeah, I can't imagine, especially nowadays, that's even harder now with, all the different additional layers of stuff and additional immigration aspects that, we have today. Yeah, it's definitely a different mindset.
I
One of the
think the
things that
other,
you,
sorry, Josh, I think, sorry to interrupt you. I think the other thought that comes to mind, which might be relevant to people that are listening that are maybe thinking about starting up their own business. This might sound really wacky, but I actually find there's greater security in owning your own business than actually being an employee in business. Thankfully, I never got laid off. I never went through any downsizing or right sizing, but I certainly saw a lot of that as the finance guy. When I was an
yeah,
employee, I'd often be in boardrooms where we'd be getting the red pen out or the blue pen out and kind of doing reorganizational charts and whatnot. So, and I've actually seen as I've aged, some of my friends, I think one of the worst things that happens, obviously, as you get older, you get more expensive to an employer, especially these large organizations. And you actually become quite a liability because of all the future obligations attached to your employment, like pensions, etc. So
yeah.
sadly, I've seen some very, very close friends get laid off, in their 40s and into their 50s now, and I absolutely love running a business because, I mean, laziness is the last word in my dictionary, but you're really turning the financial model upside down because you're growing an asset as an owner rather than becoming more of an expensive liability. And really, if you're doing it right, as you know, Josh, if you're doing it right, as the business grows, you should actually be doing less. So I don't say this with any degree of arrogance. But this year will probably be either our first or certainly our second best year in business. And with me being a recurring accountant, I keep a note of my hours, and I'm averaging like a whopping 26 hours a week. And I think if I was a full-time employee, say for Hilton or Marriott now, I think I'd be working more than 26 hours a week.
And traveling probably a lot more. I
And
think so. You sort of touched on something a little bit earlier, and then you sort of reiterated that in your statement you just said. And you were talking about, being as a business owner, you're sort of building an asset. And one of the things that you mentioned a few minutes ago was the aspect that you guys have ran the business from day one as a big business. setting up processes, procedures, and all of that type of stuff. And I think that right there is the key aspect that differentiates business owners that build an asset or business owners that build uh I don't know what else to call it, but a liability really. Like, because in reality, if you have a business, and I tell this to clients all the time, like, if we're going to create a marketing plan and we're going to create automations or strategy or whatever we're doing for our clients, like, if you can't take a vacation for a week,
Mm,
2 weeks, a month, like, if you can't take a vacation for 30 days from your business, you
yeah,
don't have a business, you have a job.
yeah,
And so that's where the scariest part to that is, like, oftentimes a business owner will say, well, when I go, in 10 years, I'll sell it. Well, if you can't take a vacation for a week from your business, you're never going to sell that business
yeah,
because there is no process and procedure in place. And it 150% revolves around you being
yeah,
there 80 plus hours a week.
yeah,
Where if you flip the script on that, like you were saying, have those processes, those procedures, and all that type of stuff set up, what'll happen is you work less because you've put in that due diligence ahead of time. Now, the thing where I see business owners get hung up on is the tasks that you have or the stuff that you have outlined in those processes and procedures. It probably takes 2 to 3 times longer to sit down and write out the process and procedure than to just do the task. And
mm,
so oftentimes people will be like, "Oh, it just takes me an hour to do it. I'll just do it. I don't wanna sit down and write out how to do it or create a manual on how to do it for someone else because it's gonna take me 2 hours." And so that short-term aspect of, like, you know, "Oh, it's not gonna work for me." It's the same thing with, looking at it from an investment perspective. Same thing with the stock market. If you put money in today and it dips 2% and you pull it back out, it's like, well, that's a bad decision. Leave it in
mhm.
for more than a year. But
I think just to respond to what you said there, I've never really thought about this before, but I do think what was in my DNA was coming from the kind of companies that I mentioned to as an employee, like Hilton, Marriott, etc., where everything was so process driven. So that was kind of in my DNA. I think three or four other points that just come to mind that I'd never really thought about before would be, first of all, I think the benefit of documenting down your processes meant that the clients that you were dealing with were going to get replicable service. So it wasn't like, well, we did it this way before, and now we're doing it in a completely different way. Because some of the jobs that we do for clients can be quite complex with different aspects of delivery. The other thing was that I found that it was very efficient to document down our processes and procedures because it wasn't like, oh, what did we decide we were going to do about this and what we're going to do about that? So we could just go to a document. We call it we actually stole the title from Ken Blanchard's book, Raving Fans, and our operations manual is called Raving Fans, to do with clients and employees and the vendors that we work with. And we wanted them to be raving fans of us. The other thing was, I think you either mentioned in your introduction or I'll certainly quickly verbalize it now. About 8 years ago, we actually replicated our business. Initially, we had a franchise with the office in Florida. So the office in Florida that we have initially was a franchise of our business. We've actually, for want of a better description, matured that now. So it's more of a license agreement, an operations agreement. But the point being is there was that Mark, who runs that office, was able to take a 58-page manual. And if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, he knew how to run the business, which then leads us on to we're hoping to next year look at opening up a third office either in Texas or in Colorado. So we've really got a kind of a turnkey business. And then the last thing, which you just alluded to, Josh, which I hadn't really thought about for quite a while, there was a phrase somebody said to me once, and we actually wrote it into our Raving Fans document. We've got these little inspiring comments under these different sections, and one of them says something along the lines of "Only do what only you can do." And so I focus more on the strategy of the business, and I focus more on the sales side of the business. and then I oversee delivery, and where necessary, I'll oversee administration. So I've just found that I can work less by giving more breathing space to others, especially when you've got down good documented processes and procedures. Again, I do want to reiterate that if somebody's thinking about starting up their own business and thinking, hey, this is the pathway to an easy life, that's not why I did what I did. I did it so that I can, enjoy life in addition to running my own business, but it's creating jobs, creating, vendor contracts where we outsource things, spending more time with, wife and family, etc., and friends. But I didn't do it from a point of view of just being lazy, because I've seen a lot of small businesses over the years fail. And I think part of the reason why they fail is often because there's a laziness where they're trying to make a quick buck, as they say.
Yeah, and I think the takeaway here is like if you're looking to start a business, so you only have to work 20 hours a week. Like Paul, you're what, 18 years into this, and now
Mm.
it's like, hey, we're able to work 20 hours, 25 hours a week, but like the first year of the business was probably very different. And so that's where, it's you have to be scrappy. You have to do everything you can to make sure you make it past that, 1 year, 5 year, 10 year mark. And then once you get to the point where you've built a system, you've built a team, you've built a business that is replicable, like you can copy and paste this thing from the sense of, you're looking at licensing and franchising. And I was going to ask about the Florida setup and how that, if you're flying back and forth all the time, but obviously we've discussed that now. So like, having those types of aspects in the business so you can sort of scale that without having to also scale up the number of hours you're working. So,
Yeah, and I think just to bold, italicise, underline, I'm not working, say, 26 hours a week because we're not doing enough. As I mentioned, I think a few minutes ago, God willing, this will actually be our very best year this year, or certainly our second best year in what the 18 years. But I think because we've got these really neat processes and procedures down, and I think most importantly, because we have hired some really good quality people and we pay them very, very well. And so I'm a great believer that if you hire well and give them clarity on what excellence look like, the best thing I can do is clear the path and get out of the way to let them do what they do really, really well. I mean, for example, today, I won't name the employee, I won't name the client, but we got one of our employees today working with a really, really well-known company that all of our listeners would know. And he's with them today on a leadership training class. He's with them all day tomorrow. And, we charge him pretty top dollar for that. But I've probably spent about an hour putting all that together, you know?
yeah, but that's the aspect there is they're not paying in reality, they're not paying for the 1 hour of your time. They're
Yeah.
paying for the 18 years of knowledge plus, and that's the 18 years of New Leaf plus the industry experience prior to that,
Oh,
all
thank you.
condensed
Yeah.
down. And that's where oftentimes, like in my industry, we see the same thing. Someone's like, well, that's only going to take you 20 minutes to do it. And it's like, yeah, but it took us 5 years of experience, 10 years of experience, 15 years of experience to know how to do X and to know how to do X in 30 minutes. Like anyone could go run that leadership conference technically, but another person might have to spend 100 hours of time preparing. And and it might not be the same outcome. Um, so it's I think it also is that preparedness, but it's also,
Yeah.
what is your experience as well?
The
So,
an analogy that I'm sure, or a metaphor that I'm sure you might have heard of, or certainly our listeners will have heard of, something on the lines of someone goes to the doctor and then they're with the doctor for like 10 minutes and the bill's like $500, and they're like, well, why can you charge me $500? Because the pill I had was, whatever. And the doctor refers, it's referring to the doctor's experience. I wouldn't wish this to sound arrogant because this isn't where I'm coming from, but as I say, for me to say pre-consult with this client and really understand what their pain points are, like a doctor would, and then prescribe a solution that I think is going to really work for them and tailor the content accordingly, and then give the breathing space for our employee to put things together and me just dot the I's and cross the T's. Um, Again, it's humbling the way you expressed it, Josh, but I do think there is something in that really that, and again, I think without labouring the point, I think somebody said to me in the very early days, just because you're a really good plumber doesn't mean you're going to be a very good plumbing business owner. And one
Yep.
of my other observations over the last 18 years is how some very successful, let's say, employees that were technicians in whatever field, then they start up their own business and they just become absolutely exhausted. They end up getting divorced, they get out of shape, they have bad relationships with their children, they break down friend relationships. And really, probably the best thing they could have done was to stay being that technician as an employee. And anyway, all that
Yeah.
to say that I think when you start up a business, you've got to focus on growing the business rather than it being the Paul show or the Josh show or the Corey show. It can't just be about you because you'll just exhaust yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I definitely agree with that.
If I could just add one more thing, actually, Josh, I'll keep it real brief because it won't be directly relevant to the majority of our listeners. But one of the blessings, really, that I think was a wonderful thing that we had from the immigration authorities in the US was we started, as I mentioned, on an entrepreneur's visa, and we had to create 3 full-time jobs within the first 3 years. And so it couldn't be the Paul show. And so from day one, I had to focus on the brand, the brand, the brand. And even now, wind the clock forward now, there are many of our clients now where they don't know me. They've never seen me conduct any training. And if they do know me, they just regard me as being like the salesperson. And I like that because again, we could focus on the brand rather than it being, say, the Paul show.
Well, and that further emphasizes the fact that you could literally take a vacation for 2 weeks
Yeah.
and no one would know you're gone because the team has your back and you don't have to be the center of the whole thing.
And isn't it
And
wonderful? Isn't it wonderful, like the times that we're living in now, Josh, with technology? I mean, my wife and I just celebrated 30 years of marriage, and we went on an Alaskan cruise a couple of weeks ago. And I took my laptop with me, and I probably spent like 20 minutes, 30 minutes every day just checking in on things. But with the technology, we can just do what we need to do remotely and
yeah,
then switch off.
yeah, yeah, it is really nice. It's great to be able to, do that. My earlier this month, well, this past month, we took a trip down with our 3-year-old down to Legoland, and being able in the morning, like same setup, like they don't open until like 8:30 or 9, depending on the day. Being able to just, yeah, check email on your phone, spend 5-10 minutes being like, cool, no fires I need to deal with today. Great.
Yeah,
And
I
on
love
with the
that.
day. So, okay. So I want to talk about, specifically about NewLeaf for a second.
Mhm.
One of the first things that we need to do is 316 clients, 9 countries, 28 states. So my question is, we got a bingo card here, 28 states. There's 2 we're missing. What 2 states do we need to target to, like, close the loop here? Uh,
How do you mean? How do you mean? I thought there's 50 states in the US.
oh, 20. Yes, you're right. Wow.
Josh,
Oh
what are you
my gosh.
doing? We're doing our, can you believe it, Josh? After all these years, we kind of dragged our feet on it, but we're actually doing our US citizenship this year. And when the kids were at college, it was just an unnecessary expense. So we wanted to get them through college without any debt. So we just held back on the citizenship, but we're actually doing it this year. So if they ask me if there's 30 states or 50 states, I'll always remember that mistake you just made.
Wow. It's been a day. I'll tell you that. I don't know how I even rounded that off. Like, yep. Well, you're over halfway. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, we're very grateful. Yeah.
Uh, um, cool. Well, so you guys do staff training, leadership development. I know locally here in Santa Clarita, you guys are doing some stuff. You've got a leadership and development in the SCV hosted over at the Logix's new headquarters. Um, what is that? That's sort of, I think, is that first off, is that an open invite for, I've seen it on your LinkedIn, so I'm assuming it's a little bit of an open invite for business, businesses who are local. Um, but is that something that would be a good invite for people who are sort of trying to find out a little bit more, get their feet wet, or maybe a business owner who maybe can't necessarily bring NewLeaf on entirely or is too small of a client? Um, what does that event look like?
Yeah, so quick backstory on that was Sandy Trudeau over at Logix. Her and I have known each other for probably 15 years, something like that. And we both are very much involved with something called ATD, which is the Association for Talent Development. And there's a chapter for that called, the LA chapter. And of course, as I'm sure everybody knows in Santa Clarita, whenever there's an event over the hill, that's always quite a challenge to go to. So Sandy and I were like, why don't we just start up our own thing? So about a year and a half ago, we started up this group that you just mentioned, L&D, Learning and Development in the SCV. And we do it on the fourth Friday of the month at 8:30 through 10 o'clock at Logix. We usually go dark in November and December for obvious reasons. And we on average have between 15 to 20 people there. I'd say about half of the people tend to be what we call internals. So they work in learning and development and they're employees within organizations. And the other half are externals. Obviously, NewLeaf as a vendor would be regarded as an external. And we really have it as a facilitated conversation. We don't have presenters. We don't have someone come in and speak to us about X. We have it as a kind of a cafe style, very democratic, lowercase d conversation that we normally nominate a facilitator from the group just to lead guide the conversation to keep us on point on time. But to answer your question, yeah, it would be ideal for anyone that works in learning and development as an employee or works external, maybe as a vendor, or is even thinking about starting up their own L&D business or is thinking about working in L&D. It's a great networking opportunity as well. We have had a couple of either business owners or operational leaders within organizations that have come to the group because they were interested in the subject to take something back to their place of work. So all that to say that it can be a resource as well for, say, a smaller business that doesn't have the financial resources to bring a vendor like us in, but wants to have, 15 people who've got knowledge of that industry to give their 2 cents, as they say, on, say, conflict resolution or teamwork or time management. But yeah, we've been really, really grateful for that, and it seems like it's really hitting a good service for people.
Got it. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I saw a post recently that you had on, I think about like last month's,
Yeah,
um, and definitely something that, I think it's cool that you're doing that, and then also something to possibly check out locally. So
I'm hoping that I might be speaking premature, but I think it's a high probability that Logix and NewLeaf are thinking about partnering on a supervisory conference that we're going to offer to people in and around Santa Clarita. Either do it free of charge or very, very nominally priced, just to be able to offer something for that mid level of an organization that is often missed out on learning and development.
yeah,
And yeah, we're thinking about doing something together. So kind of watch this space.
yeah, got it. Yeah, that'd be good. So one of the things, we've talked a lot about, your career path, where you've come from, where you are today with, the business. What is one of your biggest either losses or mistakes or the like, well, I'm definitely learning from that type situations?
Um, I think two things come to mind. Number one, and I won't name the persons because it's happened twice, where we hired bad, and it just
Oh,
wasn't the right fit. And I won't belabor that point because I'm sure every business owner has made an error in that area. Um, a kind of a sub comment on that one would be part of the process we have is we have a very diligent process to hire somebody. And this second person I'm thinking of, we actually skipped a key part of that process, which was a pilot, where we'd actually have them do a pilot seminar with one of our clients, which we'd offer to the client free of charge. And I just skipped over that process. And I said to my wife, who owns the business with me, I said, "Oh, this person will be great." And it wasn't great. So that's one example that comes to mind.
So you mean you have a process, you skipped the process, and then it came back at the end?
That's me. I'm becoming
Just
too
an
fat.
example. No,
I'm
but
becoming.
it's a good
Yeah,
example of like that's why you have the process. You have the process
exactly.
because when you don't skip the process, it turns out good most of the time. When you
Yeah,
skip the process,
yeah.
there's problems.
Let's say there's like 20 steps towards us hiring someone. I did 19 of the steps and I just said,
Oh,
hey, I think it would be an insult to get this person to do a pilot. And we skipped it and it just was a bad experience. And then the other one that comes to mind to me, which is something we definitely learned from, is we've learned to really stay in our swim lanes, Josh. And I'm sure that when I think about, say, your business, you realize there's things that you do really, really well, and that's where you do your best work. And I won't bore you or the listeners with the details, but there's been a couple of times over the years where we were asked to do like X, and we don't really do X, we do A, B, C, D, E. And we weren't attracted to X because of the client or because of the dollars. We just thought, hey, you know what, let's have a go at doing X. And it just wasn't a very pleasant experience. And either the contract was ended partway through because we didn't deliver what we said we were going to deliver. And
oh,
thankfully, that wasn't a legal issue. Or we managed to get through X, but we just thought we just don't want to do X again.
yep,
So in our industry, for example, we would get asked to do things that are just really not in our wheelhouse. And even now, we'll turn that work down now, even though the dollar might be attractive or the client might be
yep.
attractive. But all those words to say that I think we've learned to really stay in our swim lanes. As I think you and I know, I'm a big fan of the In and Out burger. And I think In-N-Out Burger is the classic example of like burgers, fries, and shakes, and they don't try and be all things to all people.
Yep.
And so in our business, we focus on helping people manage themselves, lead others, and have a strong business acumen. Why? Because we think they're the three things that can really help someone make their very best contribution inside an organization. So that's now become our filter. If we're asked to do something like health and safety training or sexual harassment training or diversity, equity, and inclusion training, which is just not in our bag, it's not in our wheelhouse, we say, thanks ever so much for asking. We can refer you to someone, but we really focus in on this burger, fries, and shake strategy, and it certainly seems to have served us well.
Yeah, and well, some of those trainings that you just mentioned that are outside your wheelhouse, like some of those you can grab a pretty templated script and
Yeah,
you could do. But for us, like we do websites, digital marketing, like all of that side of it. And I can't tell you how many times we've had clients that are like, well, could you guys come out and take our photos? Could you guys come out and do our video? We're not going to come out to your property and take photos. We're not going to come out to the business and do video production. Like I know some great photographers. I know some great video production people. Um, I can make recommendations, and then once they've got the assets ready, then we'll move forward from there.
yeah.
We did a photo shoot for a client one time, and it was it was terrible. Um, it, they weren't ready. They didn't inform us that the shoot itself was using different lighting than what we were expecting, and so it was LED, and the LEDs strobed.
Oh,
So trying to get a still image of all of the lights on at the same time, it was just, yeah. It was a very interesting experience to say the least.
yeah,
And it's one of those things where it's like that end product was good, but it would have been a lot less of a headache, a lot less of an issue, and a lot less of just us pulling our hair out if we would have allowed, a third party vendor to either come in and do that piece. Um,
I
and
think,
that's where you try to jump in on it, because at the end of the day, like, you're trying to help your client, but then you're like, no, me helping you is me saying, sorry, I can't do that.
yeah.
And being okay with that.
I think another thing that comes to mind to me, Josh, and again, please hear me on this, and obviously our listeners, I ask them to please hear the heartbeat on what I'm trying to express here, is that for us in our business, we've just learnt from experience that for us, and I do emphasize that for us, we do our best work serving, I'd say, medium to very, very large organizations. As you mentioned, we serve a lot of national organizations. If you go on our
Yeah.
website, a lot of global organizations. And it's not because, there's more money there. It's just that we found that for us, the type of work that we do, we found that that's where we swim best. On occasions, we have been asked to work with some fairly small businesses, either in our own backyard of Santa Clarita or in and around LA County. And although I think we've done good work for them, it was actually very painful to work with a smaller business for all sorts of reasons. And the other thing as well is I found that for small businesses, they can get so many of the services that a company like us offers for free from things like the small business development centers, the Employment Training Institute, where they get the ETP dollars from the state or from the federal government. And again, we don't grieve any of that, but it's like, gosh, why would you want to pay fairly top dollar for something you can get relatively for free or for pennies from some of those other resources? And
Yeah.
so I think that's another way of saying that wouldn't say it was a mistake for us working with small businesses, but it's not been as joyful as working with medium or large organizations for what we do.
Well, and the other thing is, like, if you guys are doing leadership and development or staff training, like, if a business has, you know, 1,000 people that you guys need to go through and do staff training or, leadership development with, you can develop a process. But
Yeah,
if it's a local business in Santa Clarita and they've got 5 people, like, there's not much of a, like, yeah, you can develop a process, which, you have your standard process, but like, it's a little bit less of a process that's being developed there. So it's like, okay, well, it's just 5. Like, and that's when you start to go, well, do we really need to do the whole outline? Like, do we really? And that's when you start to, like, cut corners, or not saying you
yeah.
do, but it mentally, it's like, well, it's so much smaller. And then, and at the same point, like, if it's, this is again, like, getting into, like, your pricing model, but like, if it's a per person that you guys are training, there's definitely a less, cost aspect there. So less time to prep. But
It's funny as
well,
well, just a quick comment on that as well, was that again, with us working with the kind of size of organizations you mentioned, that we might be working with them for, say, a half day or a full day or a couple of days if it's on site, or might be 2 or 3 90-minute webinars, maybe space learning over 2 or 3 weeks because of the level of the organization we're working at. But some of those smaller entities will be like, it's like a whole hour. We're going to do like an hour. Can we get it down to 30 minutes?
and that in reality, like, that, once you get into those executive leadership type
Yeah.
roles, they will pay more the more you can condense the data.
Hmm.
Because in reality, their time is worth that much more. Where a small business oftentimes is like, wait, I'm paying you $1,000 and you're only coming in for X amount of time. Like, it's like, no, 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 you're paying me because I'm condensing it all to make it as productive for your team. So I'm not here all day. Like, that's, yeah. Awesome. Well, as we wrap up, I got 2 things left. First, any
Yes.
questions that you have for me?
Something I wanted to ask you, because I think we share a similar story on this, and I'd love to throw my kind of tuppence or 2 cents, as I say, in on this one as well, is about why you came back to the chamber. When we very first moved here, we became members of the chamber, and I won't badmouth any of the previous leadership models. But we did step out of the chamber for probably a good 5, 6, 7 years. And I looked at it again about 3 or 4 years ago and looked at how Ivan and John had set things up, and Peter Warder was with them then. And I was so impressed with everything. It kind of wooed me back towards the chamber, and we've been members ever since. So I just wondered, do you mind me asking why you kind of stepped out and what kind of brought you back in? I'd love to kind of see if our stories are kind of parallel on that, or if you've got a different perspective.
Yeah, I think mine is very close to the same.
Okay.
The one thing, started the business back in 2007, 2008, the market crash. So when a market's at its peak, real estate wise, it's really easy to sell a house, which means all of a sudden everybody in Santa Clarita was a real estate agent. So nothing on the chamber. This is not their fault. It was just a population issue. In 2009, chamber events were like 80% real estate agents, it felt like. And this was just my personal, it felt like. And so when you went to, and honestly, it wasn't just the chamber, it was just networking events. You'd show up to any networking event in Santa Clarita in like late 2008, early 2009. And it was like you walk in the room and you're like, great, 90% real estate agents again, which meant when you walked out of there, all of them had asked you for your business card. And being new in business, I'm 2, 3 years in, I handed my business card out to everyone who wanted one, and then spent the next 2 weeks unsubscribing from every real estate agent's email newsletter in Santa Clarita. And so after like the third or fourth time going to an event like that as a guest, I was just like, why am I wasting my time with
Yeah.
this? Like, this is
Yeah.
such a time waste. And so I got out of that. And again, I think it's not anything against the chamber. It's 100% just that was the environment of networking at that time.
Mm.
And I joined a group locally that was a SCV marketers group. And it was
Mm.
just people who were like doing marketing stuff. And so it was like the marketing director of this company and some other guy who owned a web company locally. And so it was just people who were in my space. And I was like, this is a better spot to be for now. And then my sort of 2020 goal um, was get back in person to networking events and like do more networking events, like join the chamber and stuff. And so that was my 2020 goal. And then we all know how 2020 went. Um, and so as soon as things started reopening and events started happening again, I joined the chamber and have been, going to events fairly regularly since. So
Brilliant.
but yeah, I agree with you. I think the chamber, and obviously this is a chamber podcast, so I'm not trying to like, you know, say things like, but in reality, like Ivan, on the first episode, we talked about this briefly. Like, I think what the chamber is doing today is very much in the sense of trying to be here in Santa Clarita for business owners, trying to be a sort of mutual third party to help push entrepreneurship, to help push business ownership and business development in Santa Clarita, and help push that forward and help
Mm.
be a voice for business owners. And so I think it's definitely, they've focused very highly on that, and I think it's, from what I've been seeing going to events, just like you, I think we're seeing the same thing. So it's good.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant.
Good. Awesome. Well, is there anything important that we want to touch on before we wrap this up?
I think kind of, if I may, if anybody knows anybody that has a passion for learning and development and would be interested in opening up an office, I mean, we're thinking somewhere in Texas, we're thinking somewhere in Colorado, because naively, we just think it would be super cool to have one each of the time zones.
Oh
But if
yeah.
anybody would like to speak to us about what it would take to open up an office with us in another state, when you're one of those other two out of the 30 that you mentioned, Josh.
Never gonna live that down. I'll just have Corey edit that out. We'll just re-record it.
And you're definitely a citizen, yeah?
Yes. Well, see, I was born here. I didn't have to pass the citizenship test. See? Uh,
Well, thanks, Josh. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and it's
this is
been a pleasure
awesome.
to have this conversation.
Awesome. As always, please follow, rate, and review us wherever you get your podcast. You can follow us at The Voices of Business on social media. I am personally on LinkedIn. If you look up Joshua Maddux, we would love to have you or other business leaders join in on the conversation. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time on The Voices of Business.